Hello RGL3300 students, Dr. Conway here for Lesson 5 on Performance Monitoring of Regulations. You will recall, don't forget, in other words, the life cycle of a regulation. And this speaks to the point that I was making earlier, that regulations don't simply want you to approve a hazardous product for the market or develop a regulation that deals with hazardous products without already anticipating from the very beginning how those results or how the impact of that regulation is going to be monitored after it's approved and after it's allowing hazardous products into the market with certain provisos or limitations to manage risk. But we have to devise the monitoring of the regulation very early in the regulatory life cycle. And as the point I was making before, it's not something that post-market surveillance is not something that occurs after something has been approved. It's something that's designed in from the earliest days of the development of a regulation to deal with any regulation, but in particular a regulation to deal with hazardous products. And so we're going to talk about that issue a little bit today. Performance monitoring of regulations is a critical issue that most regulatory textbooks and a lot of people who even profess to know something about regulation don't spend a lot of time talking about. But in fact, a regulation can't be approved by the cabinet in Canada without having some kind of a structure in place as to how that regulation is going to be performance measured and evaluated, and that's called a PMEP plan, Performance Measurement and Evaluation Plan, which must follow the regulation from its very early days. The cabinet is not going to approve a regulation. The Treasury Board's not going to agree to a regulation going to cabinet without already having a performance measurement and evaluation plan for how we're going to assess the performance of that regulation after it's been formally adopted. Okay? So the purposes of a PMEP is to ensure that the regulatory activities continue to meet their initial policy objectives and accordingly are reviewed on an ongoing basis and renewed if necessary. So the PMP ensures that the regulator has a clear and logical design that ties resources and activities to expected results, describes the roles and responsibilities of the main players involved throughout the regulatory life cycle. This becomes a critically important thing. If you don't have it, it's not going to get approved. The PMEP is used to make sound judgments on how to improve performance on an ongoing basis. If once we've adopted a regulation, it's not performing accordingly, the PMEP is already come up with ways of anticipating where things might go off the rails and what corrective measures could potentially be feasible for dealing with that. And there's a number of other factors that are in the slides that go into these evaluation frameworks. And it's also a requirement that the PMEP link not only to this particular regulation, but it links also to the broader departmental management of resources and result structures. In other words, every government department has a large PMEP that says this is what our department is supposed to be, this is what we're doing to achieve, this is what we're doing to try to achieve that, and this is how we're going to measure our department to determine whether results are being accrued or not. And any regulatory element of a department is only one small element of the overall department's activities, but the PMEP of that regulation must fit into the departmental plan. Okay. The PMEP should include description and overview of the regulatory proposal, logic model known as a results-based management framework that says this is what's going to be done to implement the regulation. Okay. Here are the inputs. Here are the outputs, and here are the outcomes that we're expecting from this regulation. In other words, in our case, the harm reduction outcomes, okay, of a regulation. Here's the way we're going to measure it. Here are the indicators. This is going to be our measurement and reporting approach. This is our evaluation strategy after, say, 5 years when we have the regulation evaluated. This is how we're going to do the evaluation. Everything has to be preset. You can't adopt a regulation and then decide to change how it's going to be measured after you adopted it. All that has to be set according to the regulatory objectives and regulatory design before the regulation is ever approved by the cabinet, all right? Because it's that baseline that we're going to be using. This is what we thought was going to happen. Now when we measure it off into the future, is that what we're getting or not? We can't change the measuring stick, all right? Because then we can't compare to the baseline anymore, can we, right? So the PMEP must be set and approved by Treasury Board Secretariat and the Regulatory Affairs Sector unit there from very early on, or else it's not going to cabinet at all right? So an RBM framework is a simple portrayal of an RBM framework. Inputs, who's going to be involved, what's going to be involved, how much money is going to go into implementing this. Are 2 departments, 3 departments going to be involved? What level of involvement of the provinces, municipalities, or whatever, depending upon what's appropriate to the regulation. What activities are going to be going into compliance, promotion, and enforcement? Are we going to be running workshops? What are all the inputs in terms of activities? Are we training people? Are we doing technology cooperation programs with the industry? What are we doing? What outputs are we expecting from those inputs and activities? In other words, are we producing guidance documents? Are we producing a certain number of meetings per year or training sessions per year or whatever? Okay. And from inputs, activities, and outputs, what outcomes are we expecting? Okay, and how are we going to measure whether we're getting those outputs or not, those outcomes or not? Okay, immediate outcomes, what are they? Intermediate outcomes, what are they? What final outcomes are we seeking? When we designed the regulation, we set up our PMEP. We said we wanted to bring this incidence of this happening down to this approximate percentage, or this many events per year, or this many arrests, or this many whatever be the case, then we are measuring those factors. And we have those indicators for how we're going to measure those outcomes approved in the PMEP before the cabinet will ever sign off on a new regulation. All right? So when we monitor, in order to be able to, the PMEP is about more than evaluating at a given point in time. The PMEP also says, how am I going to go do ongoing monitoring of the performance of this regulation? And that's why, a lot of the times the PMEP will include a bunch of indicators that are going to be measured. How many industry are reporting, how many industries are reporting on time, how many industry are reporting with comprehensive reports or reports with major gaps, or whatever the important indicators are for determining whether that regulation is achieving its anticipated objectives or not, needs to be set out right at the beginning, and then those are monitored on an ongoing basis. Okay, so that's called monitoring of regulations, where you're monitoring constantly whether your regulation is meeting certain thresholds of performance that you expected from that regulation. Is it functioning as anticipated? Is it producing the immediate outcomes that we thought it was going to produce or not? Was it well designed but inadequately implemented? Is that the problem that we're encountering, if we're encountering a problem? Has there been some letdown in compliance, promotion, and enforcement? It's been vigorously implemented, but its original design, we're discovering now through our performance, was not very good. And we're going to have to, when it comes up for review, or even before then, we're going to have to go back for some amendments to the regulation. It was well designed and vigorously implemented, but you know what? What we've discovered is a lot of things have changed out there. And the original regulatory design that we thought we needed for the problem in 2021 are not the same problems that we thought we were going to have in 2023. Things have radically changed. There's been a new technology that's come on, or a completely new use for certain classes of compounds, or whatever the case may be, and the regulation may be through no fault of the design of the regulation or its implementation, but because of changing circumstances out there in the society. All right, so that's what performance monitoring can do. Okay, And there's different things, different ways regulations are. Performance review is ongoing operations or formal review period, as I was just describing. Ongoing operational review is standard practice built into regulations. A formal review period would be something like an evaluation, say 5 years out, where the regulation is evaluated. All right, and that can produce different results. And then regulatory impact evaluation assesses whether there are changes in costs and benefits. In other words, this is the formal evaluation period 5 years out, right? Where they hire a third-party company to come in and evaluate whether the regulation, or typically a set of regulations that are highly related, how are they performing, all right? And again, post hoc evaluation is the same kind of thing. And what I'm trying to get across is that ongoing performance monitoring is a standard practice for regulations. Then regulations can be designed with different requirements. It can be subject to a post hoc evaluation 5 years out, or it can be subject to periodic mini evaluations at periods throughout the regulation before it's formally reviewed. There's different ways of these things can be structured, but the key point being that ongoing performance monitoring of a regulation is critically important, and typically there is an evaluation of a regulation at some point in time to determine whether that regulation is still performing according to plans. All right. Now, all analysis of monitoring has the standard requirements, right? Evidence-based. It has to be evidence-based according to the government. It has to demonstrate how data has been tracked and stored effectively so it can be later analyzed. What data methods will be used, data analysis methods will be used. That will be in the PMEP as well. How ongoing review will be operationalized, when it is evaluated, when it will be evaluated, and how. All of that goes into the PMEP. All right. But of course, all regulation is political, so these reviews are also political, right? And so establishing a PMEP and committing to that early in the cycle can mitigate some of the politics, the desires to politically massage results of a regulation off into the future. It can prevent a lot of that behavior, but it's never all prevented, right? So a good solid PMEP that's very detailed and specific helps set out the way a regulation is going to be monitored, evaluated today, so that in the future, when it is, people, the people doing the monitoring or the formal evaluation need to be able to demonstrate how they stayed consistent with the PMEP, or if they deviated from it, why, and they have to justify it. Okay, so the PMEP is a very important consideration for looking at regulations going forward. And in any case, the cabinet is not going to approve a regulation without that formally being in place, which speaks to the point we made early in this course, is that post-market surveillance is not something that starts when a regulation has been approved or starts when a product is allowed to go on the market. It's something that's set up early in the regulatory life cycle, and it maps and it follows the regulatory life cycle all the way to a post hoc evaluation. If the regulation is substantially revised at the post hoc evaluations, then a revised PMEP will be necessary. And for the very reasons that I'm talking to you about, because the PMEP talks about how you're going to compare results against the pre-regulation baseline. There was a harm that you're addressing through your regulation. PMEP says this is how we're going to approach that, and this is how we're going to measure whether we're getting results and approaching it that way or not. And then ongoing performance monitoring, and then formal post hoc evaluation will occur for the regulation. But again, that's all designed in before the regulation can even be approved, okay? So, those are the key points that I want to get across in this. So read the slides. Look at the guidance documents from the federal government on PMEP to get a better sense as to what's involved with that and how it relates to post-market surveillance. Don't forget to do your quiz for this week. No Zoom call this week, but there will be a Zoom call next week. All right? So everybody have a good, solid week, and keep it going. Good that you got part 1 done, and we'll go from there. All right? Take care, gang. Bye-bye now.